In its long history, only 3 men have ever been awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest medal for gallantry, twice. I've previously told the stories of the first 2, Arthur Martin-Leake and Noel Chavasse. And now it's time for the 3rd man, Charles Upham. Unlike the other 2 men who were medics and British, Upham was a New Zealander, and he was also an infantryman, making him the only combat soldier to have ever been awarded the VC twice. And this is his incredible story. Charles Hazlitt Upham was born in Christchurch, New Zealand in 1908. With his home city very much the centre of South Island's agricultural trade, it's probably not surprising that after school Charles Upham headed to Canterbury Agricultural College. Following his time at the college, which is now Lincoln University, he went into sheep farming, eventually becoming a farm manager for 6 years, before taking up the role of a land valuer for the government. In 1938 he became engaged to Mary, known to her friends as Molly, McTamney, who, through her mother, was a distant relative of double Victoria Cross recipient Noel Chavasse, who I've previously talked about. However, before they could marry, the Second World War broke out. New Zealand declared war when advised that Britain's ultimatum to Berlin had expired on the 3rd of September 1939. Upham, who had been in the New Zealand Reserves for several years, immediately enlisted, joining the 20th Battalion in the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. The Expeditionary Force was commanded by General Bernard Freyberg VC, who had been awarded Britain's highest medal for gallantry back at the Battle of the Somme during the First World War. Despite having risen to the rank of sergeant whilst in the reserves, Upham insisted on enlisting as a private. That sort of humble attitude was to be the hallmark of this incredible man, both during the war and for the rest of his life. Nevertheless, both his experience and leadership skills were swiftly recognised. By the time the Expeditionary Force was embarking for Egypt just 3 months later, in December 1939, he had been promoted to the rank of sergeant. Once in Egypt, Charles Upham was persuaded to attend the Officer Cadet Training Unit, something he had not initially been keen to do. Successfully completing the course, 2nd Lieutenant Upham returned to the 20th Battalion. And in March 1941, the New Zealand Expeditionary Force was deployed to Greece as part of the Allied attempt to counter the German-Italian invasion there. In a short-lived campaign, the Axis forces swept through Greece, resulting in 50,000 Allied troops having to be evacuated by the Royal Navy. Just over a third of their force was now deployed on the Greek island of Crete. Included in their number was Charles Upham. On the 20th of May 1941, German airborne troops landed on the island. For the next 11 days, British, New Zealand and Greek troops were locked in a bitter and bloody battle with the Germans for the island. The day after the initial German landing, Upham's company were part of a counterattack, the goal of which was to retake the airfield at Malimi. Upham led a platoon in an attack on several German machine gun posts. Advancing 3,000 yards under fire with no artillery support, Upham's men took out the first machine gun using grenades and pistols. Upham himself then crept up to a house where another machine gun was based and tossed in some grenades to end their resistance. A further machine gun now opened up on the New Zealanders. Once more, their officer took it upon himself to crawl to within 15 yards of the Germans, lobbing some grenades into the enemy position. However, despite Upham's successes, the Allied counterattack failed due to German air superiority, and they were forced to withdraw. As they retreated under German fire, Upham carried a wounded man back to safety and then encouraged several of his men to do likewise. Whilst Upham got his platoon out, it now transpired that one company had not received the order to withdraw and were now isolated behind the advancing German lines. Upham, accompanied by a corporal, now ran 600 yards through the German lines, killing 2 Germans en route and successfully brought the company back to safety. The battle for Crete was fast becoming a rerun of the German victory on the Greek mainland. The Allies fought a desperate retreat towards the south of the island in the hope of yet another evacuation. It was a brutal and bloody affair, and Charles Upham was in the thick of it. Despite receiving a shrapnel wound to his shoulder and 3 days later a bullet wound to his foot, he stayed with his men. On the 25th of May at Galatas, he and his men ambushed the advancing Germans, killing 40 of them and forcing the rest to retreat. Each time the Allies tried to hold a line, the Germans broke through. On one occasion, in this fast-moving situation, Upham left his platoon to retreat under his sergeant, whilst he went forward to warn another company they were about to be left behind. Suddenly, he ran into 2 Germans who opened fire. Falling to the ground, Charles Upham pretended to be dead. And whilst feigning death, he managed to rest his gun in the fork of a tree trunk, and as the Germans came close, he opened fire, killing both of them. The second German was so close that as he actually fell onto the muzzle of Upham's rifle. Having survived that brush with death, the New Zealander then proceeded to the company and once more brought them back to Allied lines. For his actions in the Battle of Crete, his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Howard Kippenberger, recommended Upham for the Victoria Cross. Charles Upham was totally against the award, modestly feeling that it was undeserved. Eventually, his commanding officer convinced him that it was for his bravery and the service of the whole unit. He was gazetted for the VC in October 1941. By then, Upham had been evacuated to Egypt. He was one of the lucky ones. Of the 18,000-strong British and Commonwealth Army in Crete, 3,500 had been killed, and 12,000 had been captured. For the record, the Germans had suffered around 6,000 killed and wounded. As I said earlier, the battle for Crete was a bloody affair. Promoted to the rank of captain, Charles Upham and the rest of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force now formed part of the British 8th Army, based in Egypt. The New Zealanders would stay in the 8th Army until the end of the war, first in North Africa and then in the long slog through Italy, including Monte Cassino. But those advances were in the future. In late 1941, early 1942, the 8th Army were on the defensive, being pushed back by Rommel's Afrika Korps. In late June 1942, the New Zealanders were in danger of actually being completely cut off as Rommel swept into Egypt. On the night of the 27th of June, they desperately made a break for British lines. The ensuing battle saw Captain Upham's company participate in fierce hand-to-hand fighting with the Germans. Once more, Upham was in the thick of things, and once more he was using grenades to lethal effect. In fact, he was throwing them at such short range that he was injured in both arms by shrapnel from his own grenades. The breakout was a success, and the New Zealand division was moved into the defensive line centred on the small railway town of El Alamein. In fact, the New Zealanders were positioned to the south of the town and ordered to take the high ground at the El Ruwazat Ridge. The attack began at 11 p.m. on the 14th of July. Along the ridge, they met fierce resistance from the Germans. Upham's own company found themselves facing 4 machine gun nests and several tanks holding the high ground. Once more, Charles Upham inspired his men to press home their attack. And once more, grenades were key to their assault. Upham was credited with personally destroying several machine gun posts and a tank as they stormed the ridge. In the process, he was shot in the elbow by one of the machine guns. Refusing to leave the battlefield, he got his wounds dressed as best they could at a regimental aid post, and then he went back to his men. The following day, the Germans and their Italian allies launched a ferocious counter-attack, during which Upham was hit in the leg by shrapnel. Unable to move, he and the remaining 6 men of his company were captured, along with about 1,000 fellow New Zealanders. For his gallantry in this battle, he was to receive a bar to his Victoria Cross. The bar in British medals basically means a second award. But that is for the future in this story. In the meantime, Charles Upham found himself in an Italian military hospital, where a surgeon recommended that his damaged arm needed amputation. I think you're probably getting the measure of this New Zealander by now, so it won't surprise you to find out that he refused. Nor will you be surprised to find out that Captain Charles Upham VC didn't take being a prisoner of war lying down. He tried to escape on numerous occasions and would be sent to the most notorious POW camp of them all, as I'm about to tell you. Whilst he felt it would be morally wrong to escape while he was in hospital, immediately he left, the gloves came off. Even before he'd arrived at his first prison camp in Italy, he'd made his first bid for freedom. As the lorry transporting him slowed down to negotiate a bend in the road, Upham leapt out of the back and started running. He managed to run 400 yards, 400 metres, before the guards caught him. It actually transpired he'd broken his ankle in his jump from the lorry, so in fairness, running 400 yards on a broken ankle was pretty impressive. He was incarcerated in a POW camp near Modena when the Italians surrendered to the Allies in September 1943. Any hopes of freedom were dashed as the Germans conducted Operation Axis, occupying Italy. The war on the peninsula would continue for the next 20 months until the Germans surrender in 1945. With Italy now under their control, but with the Allies landing in the south, the Germans decided to move their newly acquired POWs north. On this journey, Upham unsuccessfully tried to saw a hole through the bottom of the truck with a kitchen knife that he had managed to get hold of. At his next camp, he boldly tried to scale the double fence in broad daylight. Once more, his efforts didn't succeed as he fell down between the two fences. With an irate German pointing his rifle at Upham's head and shouting he'd shoot him, the New Zealander coolly sat up and lit a cigarette. He was put in solitary confinement. His only release from this monotony was a short walk around the exercise yard, with a German machine gunner following his every step. Amazingly, Captain Upham nevertheless made yet another bid for freedom. As he walked past the German guards' barrack in the exercise yard, he leapt through the door and sprinted out the other end. The machine gunner later said he didn't have the heart to shoot him, because from his vantage point, he could see what Charlie Upham couldn't. Marching towards the barracks was a platoon of German soldiers, and our escaping hero ran straight into them. Halt! The Germans had had enough of Charles Upham. Quite frankly, he was a pain in the butt. They decided there was only one place left for him, the most secure and the most infamous POW camp of them all, Upham VC, otherwise known as Colditz. En route to the forbidding castle in Germany, Upham found time for one final escape attempt. Marked as a highly dangerous and disruptive prisoner, the Germans were conscious that he could use any opportunity to escape from the train as it was sped towards Germany. Where other men might simply go to the toilet, the Germans knew that being alone in a cubicle was just inviting Upham to try to escape, and therefore they introduced a cunning plan. He could only go to the toilet when the train was travelling at high speed, so he couldn't jump off. But we are talking about a Kiwi sheep farmer who'd been awarded the Victoria Cross. Do you think he was daunted about jumping from a high-speed train? Of course not! Despite the speed, Charles Upham wiggled through the toilet window and dropped down the side of the train. The impact of hitting the ground actually knocked him out, but when he came to, he took off into the countryside, and he remained at liberty for 12 hours before the Germans tracked him down. That was October 1943. He was to remain at Colditz until the castle was liberated by advancing US troops in April 1945. Whilst most prisoners were happy to head off home, Upham asked to join the Americans in their advance. It was only when he received specific orders forbidding him to do so that his war finally came to an end. On the 11th of May 1945, just 3 days after the Germans finally surrendered, he received his first Victoria Cross from King George VI at Buckingham Palace. Whilst in Britain, he was reunited with Molly, who was serving as a nurse in Hampshire. In June 1945, they were married in the Catholic Church in New Milton. They would remain married for nearly 50 years and had 3 daughters. In September 1945, he was awarded his second Victoria Cross for his actions at that first Battle of El Alamein back in 1943, which I told you about earlier. He is one of only 3 men ever to have been awarded the VC twice. The other 2 recipients, Martin-Leake and Noel Chavasse, were both medics, so Charles Upham is the only combat soldier to have ever achieved this feat. He returned to New Zealand a hero, but this hero status was something he really didn't like, and he turned down an offer from the New Zealand government of £10,000 to buy him a farm. Instead, he asked for the money to be used to establish a fund to help educate ex-servicemen. Throughout the long years after the Second World War, he maintained that others had done just as much as him, but without the reward. This modest man used his own money to buy a farm, about 100 miles north of Christchurch in the Hunderley area of South Island, and he remained on the farm until the early 1990s when age and his wartime injuries started to catch up with him. Charles Upham VC and Bar died in 1994 at the age of 86. Molly outlived him by 6 years. His funeral with full military honours was held at Christchurch Cathedral. He remained modest and publicity shy to the very end, and after the service was buried in a simple grave in a suburb of the city. He remains the last British or Commonwealth serviceman to have been awarded the Victoria Cross twice. Well, thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed that story about Charles Upham, VC and Bar. Plenty more stories on the way for you, but in the meantime, thanks for your support, keep well, and I'll see you very soon.